Before we dive into presenting physical evidence that challenges the heliocentric model, we need to understand the deeper origins of this worldview. Heliocentrism, the idea that the sun is at the center of the universe and the earth revolves around it, didn't come from neutral scientific inquiry. In fact, it was promoted for very specific spiritual, political, and educational reasons. The aggressive promotion of this model fits within a larger agenda aimed at deceiving humanity. So, before we present the hard evidence, we need to lay the groundwork for why this model became the foundation of modern science. To fully grasp how heliocentrism gained such a foothold in society, we have to start with the Jesuits. The Jesuit order, also known as the Society of Jesus, was established in 1540 by Ignatius of Loyola during the Counter-Reformation. Their purpose wasn't just to spread religious teachings, but to shape education, politics, and science in a way that would benefit the Catholic Church. The Jesuits were a militarized and highly disciplined group, wielding control over intellectual and spiritual spheres. One of their most significant strategies was to take control of education, particularly in scientific thought. By establishing universities and schools, the Jesuits positioned themselves as the gatekeepers of knowledge. Their influence went far beyond the pulpit. They shaped the minds of Europe's intellectual elite, particularly in science and philosophy. Their goal wasn't just spiritual salvation, but to create a worldview that served their political and religious ambitions. One key player in this plan was Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish mathematician and astronomer who proposed the heliocentric model. While Copernicus himself wasn't a Jesuit, his ideas were seized upon by them after his death in 1543. Jesuit scholars like Christoph Clavius and Athanasius Kircher promoted Copernicus's heliocentric model as part of their larger agenda. By removing the Earth from its central place in the universe, they could diminish humanity's role in creation, making people more reliant on the Church and its interpretation of science rather than biblical teachings. It's important to note that this wasn't a universally accepted idea. In fact, Martin Luther and John Calvin both rejected heliocentrism. Luther famously referred to Copernicus as a fool for wanting to reverse the entire science of astronomy, while Calvin quoted Psalm 93:1, saying, "The world is established, it cannot be moved," in defense of the geocentric biblical view of the universe. Their opposition to heliocentrism highlights that this wasn't just a scientific debate. It was a theological and spiritual battle over the understanding of God's creation. Fast forward to modern times, and we see the same agenda being pushed through NASA, the leading organization responsible for promoting the heliocentric model today. But NASA's origins are far from purely scientific. The institution was shaped by individuals deeply involved in occult practices, particularly Jack Parsons and Wernher von Braun. Let's start with Jack Parsons, a brilliant rocket scientist and co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which laid the foundation for NASA. But Parsons wasn't just interested in science. He was also a devoted follower of Aleister Crowley, one of the most notorious occultists of the 20th century. Crowley, who called himself the Great Beast 666, was a proponent of Thelema, a philosophy centered on the motto, "Do what thou wilt." Parsons took this philosophy to heart, engaging in rituals like the Babylon Working, designed to open a portal to otherworldly entities. This occult background isn't a footnote in NASA's history. It played a central role in its formation. On the other side, we have Wernher von Braun, a former Nazi scientist who was brought to the US through Operation Paperclip after World War II. Von Braun had been instrumental in developing Nazi Germany's rocket program and had ties to the SS, an organization deeply involved in the occult. Nazi occultism, led by figures like Heinrich Himmler, wasn't just a fringe interest. It was woven into the fabric of their political and scientific goals. When von Braun came to the United States, his knowledge of rocketry was vital in establishing NASA, but his background raises questions about the spiritual and ideological influences behind the organization. Together, Parsons and von Braun built the early foundations of NASA, and their occult ties cannot be ignored. When we examine NASA's mission to perpetuate the heliocentric worldview, we have to question whether the organization's true purpose is scientific or if it's part of a deeper spiritual deception. But NASA's occult roots didn't just come from its founders. They were part of a broader spiritual movement led by figures like Aleister Crowley and Helena Blavatsky, whose influence extends far beyond the world of science. Crowley's philosophy wasn't just about spiritual exploration, it was about rebelling against God. His famous motto, "Do what thou wilt," was a declaration of independence from divine authority, encouraging humanity to follow its own will rather than God's law. Crowley believed that humanity was being guided by spiritual entities, beings that he identified as angels, but who were, in fact, fallen angels. Crowley wasn't alone in this effort. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society, promoted similar ideas through her work, particularly in The Secret Doctrine. Blavatsky claimed that humanity was being guided by ascended masters, spiritual beings who were supposedly overseeing human evolution. She promoted a worldview that aligned with both the heliocentric model and Darwinian evolution, further distancing humanity from the biblical account of creation. Blavatsky's work wasn't just a spiritual philosophy, it was an effort to reshape humanity's understanding of the universe and our place in it. The philosophies of Crowley and Blavatsky weren't just spiritual, they were tied to the promotion of ideas like heliocentrism, which redefined humanity's role in the universe and weakened the biblical worldview. Their influence was widespread, affecting not just religious thought but science and education as well. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Rockefeller family played a pivotal role in reshaping science and education in the United States. The Rockefellers used their immense wealth to influence the direction of scientific research and control the educational system, pushing a secular, materialistic worldview that aligned with their interests. Through the Rockefeller Foundation, they funded universities and research institutions, ensuring that Darwinian evolution and the heliocentric model became the dominant paradigms. The Rockefellers weren't interested in promoting biblical creation or a spiritual understanding of the universe. Their goal was to create a compliant, secular society that would be easier to control. John D. Rockefeller himself famously said, "I want a nation of workers, not thinkers." This statement reflects his desire to mold the population into obedient, non-questioning individuals who would accept the secular narratives of evolution and heliocentrism without challenging them. The Rockefeller family's influence extended far beyond education. By controlling the funding of scientific research, they ensured that only certain ideas, those that aligned with a materialistic, godless view of the world, would be promoted. Their efforts were part of a larger agenda to push God out of the public consciousness and replace divine creation with a secular, evolutionary narrative. At the same time that heliocentrism was gaining traction, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was being promoted as the definitive explanation for the origins of life. Like heliocentrism, evolution directly challenged the biblical narrative of creation, suggesting that life emerged through random processes over millions of years rather than by divine creation. Darwin's work, particularly his book On the Origin of Species, provided a naturalistic explanation for the diversity of life. But even Darwin acknowledged that there were significant problems with his theory, especially the lack of transitional fossils in the fossil record. Despite these challenges, Darwin's theory was aggressively promoted by secular educators and financiers like the Rockefellers, who saw evolution as a way to undermine the biblical worldview and promote a materialistic understanding of life. By the early 20th century, evolution was being taught as scientific fact in public schools, thanks to the efforts of secular reformers and financiers. This marked a deliberate shift away from biblical education, and it reinforced the secular worldview that had been gaining ground since the promotion of heliocentrism. The promotion of heliocentrism, evolution, and secular education isn't just a series of unrelated events. These movements are part of a coordinated spiritual war, the same war that began in Genesis 3:15, where God declared enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. From the beginning, Satan and the fallen angels have been working to deceive humanity, corrupting our understanding of creation and turning us away from God's truth. Heliocentrism and evolution are tools in this war. By promoting these theories, the forces of darkness have sought to create a worldview where God is either distant or non-existent. The goal is to disconnect humanity from the truth of creation, leading people to believe that they are cosmic accidents rather than the intentional creation of a loving God. The heliocentric model isn't just a scientific theory, it's part of a larger spiritual deception designed to prepare humanity for the final battle. The Bible warns us in 2 Thessalonians 2, 9-11 of a powerful delusion in the last days, where many will be led astray. The promotion of heliocentrism, evolution, and secular education is laying the groundwork for this delusion, leading humanity to believe in a universe where God is an enemy to be fought. The fallen angels have been orchestrating this deception for centuries. By convincing humanity that the universe is vast and filled with life on other planets, they are preparing us for a future deception where God will be presented as a malevolent alien invader. This spiritual deception is not just a theory. It is the ultimate battle for humanity's soul, and it is playing out right now in our science, education, and culture. When we really start looking into the physical evidence, the globe model just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. From the lack of observable curvature to flight paths that don't make sense on a globe, everything points to the Earth being flat and stationary. Let's dive into the 7 most compelling pieces of physical evidence that challenge the globe model, and I'll also walk you through the common objections people raise and explain why those arguments fall short. The first issue we encounter with the globe model is the missing curvature. We're told that the Earth curves at approximately 8 inches per mile squared, which means that as you look over long distances, objects should gradually disappear from view, hidden behind the curve. But when we put this to the test, it just doesn't match what we see. A great example of this is the famous view of the Chicago skyline from Michigan City, Indiana, across Lake Michigan. That's about 60 miles, and according to the globe model, over 1,700 feet of the city should be hidden behind the curve. Yet the entire skyline is clearly visible. People often try to dismiss this by saying it's atmospheric refraction, but this observation has been repeated under different conditions, and the skyline remains visible. So, refraction can't explain it. And it doesn't stop there. Another example is seeing the island of Oahu from Kauai in Hawaii, a distance of 108 miles. Based on the curvature formula, over 7,000 feet, more than a mile, of Oahu should be hidden from view. But you can see the island from Kauai, which should be impossible on a globe. Then there's the footage taken from weather balloons that have been sent up to 121,000 feet. At that altitude, if the Earth were curved, we should be seeing a noticeable drop-off in the horizon. But what do we actually see? The horizon is completely flat, and it rises to eye level, even at such extreme heights. That's the kind of evidence that directly contradicts the globe model. If curvature were real, we would have seen it by then. And for those who argue that the curve is only visible at higher altitudes, or that refraction bends light in such a way, the footage from high-altitude balloons without any fisheye lenses makes it clear. The horizon is flat. At over 100,000 feet, the curvature should be glaringly obvious, yet the horizon remains level. Next, let's talk about water. One of the simplest ways to test whether the Earth is flat or curved is by looking at how water behaves. Water always seeks and maintains a level surface. Whether we're talking about a glass of water, a lake, or the ocean, water doesn't curve, it lays flat. If the Earth were truly a globe, we would expect to see water curving around it. But that's not what happens. One of the most well-known experiments that demonstrates this is the Bedford level experiment. Samuel Rowbotham conducted it over a 6-mile stretch of water along the old Bedford River. According to the globe model, there should have been a 24-foot drop due to the Earth's curvature, but Rowbotham found that the water was perfectly level. This experiment has been replicated several times, and the results are always the same: no detectable curvature. Another clear example is the Suez Canal, which stretches over 100 miles. When engineers were constructing the canal, they didn't have to account for any curvature in the water's surface. They found that the water remained level the entire way, which flies in the face of the idea that water bends around a globe. The same goes for large bodies of water like the Great Salt Lake in Utah or the Caspian Sea. Even over vast distances, the water remains flat. Laser tests conducted across these lakes have consistently shown no measurable curvature. And the usual argument I hear is that gravity supposedly causes water to curve around the Earth. But in reality, we never see that. Water behaves as if it's flat, and we see this in laser tests, high-precision surveying, and everyday observations. If water could curve around a globe, we'd see that curvature, especially in oceans and large lakes, yet it's not there. Now, when we start looking at flight paths, especially in the southern hemisphere, we see more evidence that the globe model doesn't make sense. On a globe, planes should follow the shortest route between 2 points, known as a Great Circle route. But when we examine actual flight paths, they don't match up with what the globe model predicts. In fact, many flight paths take strange, inefficient detours that only make sense on a flat Earth map. Take flights between Santiago, Chile, and Sydney, Australia. Instead of flying directly across the Pacific, these flights often stop in places like Los Angeles or Dallas. On a globe, that makes no sense because those cities are far off the direct route. But when you map it on a flat Earth, those stops make perfect sense. They fall along a straight line. Another great example is the flight between Johannesburg, South Africa, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sometimes these flights have layovers in Europe, which is thousands of miles out of the way if we're looking at a globe. But on a flat Earth map, those routes are far more direct. And then there's the case of emergency landings. Eddie Alencar documented 17 emergency landings that defy explanation on a globe, but make perfect sense on a flat Earth map. One example is a flight from Taiwan to Los Angeles that had to make an emergency landing in Alaska. On a globe, Alaska is way off the flight path, but on a flat Earth map, it's a direct route. I've heard the usual explanations that these flight paths are determined by logistics, things like fuel stops or cost efficiency. But with modern planes, there's no need for frequent refueling, and direct flights would often be cheaper. Another explanation I hear is that weather or air traffic management plays a role, but the consistent detours and layovers we see, especially in the southern hemisphere, point to the globe model being flawed. Let's move on to gyroscopes and inertial systems. Gyroscopes are used in aviation and maritime navigation to keep planes and ships on course. They're based on the principles of inertia, meaning that if the Earth were spinning at over 1,000 miles per hour, these devices would need to account for that motion. But they don't. Instead, they behave as if the Earth is completely stationary. Pilots have confirmed that gyroscopes remain level throughout long flights without adjusting for the curvature of the Earth. If the Earth were curved, the gyroscope would have to gradually tilt, but that doesn't happen. In fact, inertial navigation systems, which track changes in velocity and direction, also make no adjustments for the Earth's supposed rotation. Even on long international flights, these systems don't factor in the rotation of the Earth. Experiments using fiber optic gyroscopes have also shown the same results. In the documentary Behind the Curve, they used a fiber optic gyroscope to test whether the Earth was rotating. The gyroscope should have detected a 15-degree-per-hour drift if the Earth were spinning, but the experiment found no measurable rotation, which supports the idea of a flat, stationary Earth. Some people try to argue that gyroscopes are simply set to follow the horizon, so they don't need to adjust for curvature. But if the horizon were curved, the gyroscope would still need to tilt to match that curve, and it doesn't. Others claim that inertial systems don't need to account for the Earth's rotation because they are relative to the moving vehicle. But if the Earth were spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, those systems would need to factor that in for accuracy, and the fact that they don't is strong evidence that the Earth is not rotating. Now, according to the globe model, the Earth is spinning at over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. If that were true, we should be able to detect that motion, either in our daily lives or through scientific experiments. But the reality is, we don't feel the Earth spinning, and scientific instruments haven't been able to detect this motion either. One of the most well-known experiments on this is the Michelson-Morley experiment, conducted in 1887. The experiment was designed to detect the Earth's motion through space by measuring the speed of light in different directions. If the Earth were moving, the speed of light should vary depending on the direction of the Earth's motion, but the experiment found nothing. There was no measurable movement, suggesting that the Earth is stationary. The Sagnac experiment, conducted in 1913, was another attempt to detect the Earth's rotation using light beams in a rotating system. Just like the Michelson-Morley experiment, it failed to detect any rotation. And even if you set aside these scientific experiments, just think about your own experience. Do you feel the Earth spinning at over 1,000 miles per hour? No, we don't. If the Earth were moving at such speeds, we would expect to see some kind of effect, whether in the winds, the behavior of water, or objects being thrown off the surface, but we don't observe any of that. People often say that the Earth's motion is too subtle to detect in everyday life. But the fact that scientific instruments designed to measure this motion consistently fail to find any evidence of it should raise serious questions. The Michelson-Morley and Sagnac experiments were created specifically to detect the Earth's motion, and both came up empty-handed. Now let's talk about high-altitude balloon and rocket footage. If the Earth were truly a globe, we should see the curvature of the horizon become more pronounced the higher we go. But when independent researchers send up high-altitude balloons or rockets equipped with cameras, the footage shows a flat horizon, even at extreme altitudes. Weather balloons have reached heights of up to 121,000 feet, and the horizon remains completely flat, rising to eye level. If the Earth were a globe, the horizon would curve downward and fall below eye level at that height, but that's not what we see. And this footage is taken with non-distorting lenses, so we're not talking about fisheye lens effects here. The horizon remains flat and level, even from such a high altitude. Independent researchers have also launched rockets equipped with cameras that reached altitudes of over 100,000 feet. The footage from these rockets shows the same thing, a flat horizon. If the Earth were curved, we should see the horizon bending downwards, but it remains level. Some argue that the Earth is so large that the curvature is hard to detect, even at high altitudes. But at 121,000 feet, we should be seeing some significant curvature if the globe model were correct. The fact that the horizon stays flat and rises to eye level challenges everything we've been told about the shape of the Earth. And finally, let's consider the Sun and the Moon. The globe model tells us that the Sun is 93 million miles away, and the Moon is about 240,000 miles away, yet they appear to be roughly the same size in the sky. We're told this is just a coincidence of perspective, but the odds of such a precise match are incredibly low. Think about total solar eclipses. During an eclipse, the Moon perfectly covers the Sun. If the Sun were truly 400 times larger and 400 times farther away than the Moon, this kind of perfect alignment would be nearly impossible. The fact that the Sun and Moon appear to be the same size during an eclipse suggests that their actual sizes and distances are different than what we're being told. What's even more interesting is that the apparent size of the Sun and Moon remains consistent no matter where you are on Earth. Whether you're at the equator or closer to the poles, the Sun and Moon look the same. If the Earth were a globe and the Sun were 93 million miles away, we'd expect to see some variation in their sizes due to the curvature of the Earth, but that doesn't happen. People will say that the similar size of the Sun and Moon is just a coincidence, but the chances of such a perfect match happening by chance are astronomically low. Others argue that the distances of the Sun and Moon have been accurately measured, but those measurements are based on assumptions tied to the heliocentric model. When we start to question those assumptions, the flat Earth explanation starts to make a lot more sense. When we examine the physical evidence, the globe model just doesn't hold up. From the lack of observable curvature to strange flight paths and the failure of scientific instruments to detect the Earth's rotation, everything points to a flat, stationary Earth. Even the Sun and Moon's apparent size raises questions about the globe model. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at observational data and repeatable experiments that further confirm the reality of a flat Earth. Section 3. Observational data, supporting the flat Earth model. When we start looking at the world around us and doing our own observations, it becomes clear that the Earth is not a spinning globe. Everything from the way we see distant objects to how celestial bodies behave supports the idea that the Earth is flat and stationary. Let's go through 7 key observations that anyone can verify for themselves, and I'll explain why these observations contradict the globe model. First, let's talk about how we observe distant objects. If the Earth were a globe, distant objects should gradually disappear from view as they go beyond the curve of the Earth. But what we actually see is that we can observe objects at distances far beyond what the globe model would allow. For instance, ships are often said to disappear over the curve as they sail out to sea. But with modern zoom technology, we can bring those ships back into view, proving that they never went over a curve. It's just the limits of our eyesight that make them disappear initially. This is something anyone can test for themselves with a high zoom camera. A common argument from globe supporters is that the ship reappears due to refraction, where light bends over the curve of the Earth. But refraction can only account for slight distortions, not the full reappearance of a ship that should be miles beyond the curve. Zooming in with a camera reveals that the ship never went over any curve in the first place. And it's not just ships. There are countless examples of people using telescopes or zoom cameras to bring distant objects, like mountains or cities, back into view. This should be impossible if they had gone beyond the curve of the Earth, but we can still see them. Another interesting observation comes from lighthouses. Lighthouses are designed to be seen from long distances by ships, and many of them can be seen from farther away than the globe model should allow. For example, the Isle of Wight's St. Catherine's Lighthouse has a visible range of 30 miles. If the Earth were curved, that light would be hidden by nearly 600 feet of curvature, but ships can still see it from that distance. Globe proponents might argue that atmospheric conditions like superior mirages are at play here, where light bends upward to allow ships or lighthouses to appear visible beyond the horizon. But again, this would be a rare occurrence and not something we consistently observe across different conditions. Next, let's consider star trails. If you've ever seen a long exposure photo of the night sky, you'll notice that the stars appear to move in circular patterns, known as star trails. In the northern hemisphere, they circle around Polaris, the North Star, while in the southern hemisphere, they circle around a point near the Southern Cross constellation. What's fascinating is that these star trails are perfectly circular, regardless of where you are on Earth. Now, according to the globe model, the Earth is spinning on its axis while orbiting the Sun at incredible speeds. But if that were true, we should see some distortion in these star trails. Instead, they remain perfectly circular, indicating that the stars are rotating above a stationary Earth. Some might argue that the globe is so large and the stars are so far away that the distortion isn't noticeable. But if the Earth were moving as fast as we're told, both spinning and speeding around the Sun, there should still be some measurable difference in the star trails over time, and we don't see that. The next observational point involves flight times and routes. If the Earth were a globe, flight times should vary significantly between flights traveling east versus west due to the Earth's supposed rotation. For example, a plane flying west should encounter less resistance than one flying east, since the Earth is rotating in the same direction as the eastward flight. However, in practice, flight times are relatively consistent, whether a plane is flying east or west. Additionally, when we look at flight paths, especially in the southern hemisphere, we see flights taking strange, indirect routes that only make sense on a flat Earth. These observations go hand in hand with the strange detours we discussed earlier, but here we're focusing more on how the times don't match up with what the globe model predicts. The usual response is that flight paths are chosen for logistical reasons, things like air traffic or weather conditions. While that may explain some cases, it doesn't account for the consistent patterns we see in the southern hemisphere, where flights routinely take routes that don't align with the globe's geometry. Let's move on to the behavior of the Sun. One of the most compelling observations is the way the Sun behaves as it moves through the sky. On a flat Earth, the Sun's motion above us would create the patterns of daylight and darkness that we observe. In the globe model, we're told that the Earth rotates to create day and night, but the way the Sun sets and rises doesn't fully align with that explanation. For example, during certain times of the year, People at the equator observe the sun setting almost vertically, while in higher latitudes, the sun moves horizontally as it sets. This wouldn't make sense if the Earth were a spinning sphere, but it makes perfect sense on a flat plane where the sun moves in circular patterns above the Earth. A typical response is that the sun's angle at sunset is simply due to the Earth's tilt. But if that were the case, we should see more consistent patterns at all latitudes. Instead, the flat Earth model explains why the sun's behavior is different depending on your location. Another thing we notice is that, at higher latitudes, the sun stays visible for much longer during the summer, creating what's known as the midnight sun. This phenomenon, where the sun remains visible even at midnight, is difficult to explain with the globe model but fits perfectly with the flat Earth's explanation of the sun's circular motion over the plane. Speaking of the sun, have you ever noticed how, at sunset, the sun appears larger and redder? Globe supporters will say that this is due to the atmosphere bending the sun's light, but in reality, what we're seeing is the sun moving away from us along a flat plane. As the sun gets farther away, its light has to travel through more of the atmosphere, which causes the red tint and the apparent increase in size. It's not sinking below the horizon, it's simply moving out of our line of sight. Another important observation has to do with the moon. We're told that the moon reflects the light of the sun, but if you've ever observed the moon on a clear night, you'll notice something strange. The moon's light is cool, not warm like the sun's light. You can test this yourself by placing a thermometer in moonlight and then moving it into the shade. What you'll find is that objects in direct moonlight are actually cooler than those in the shade. Globe believers often dismiss this by claiming it's simply nighttime cooling or atmospheric conditions. But when we compare objects in direct moonlight to those in the shade, there's a measurable temperature difference that shouldn't be there if the moon were merely reflecting the sun's light. This phenomenon, known as cold moonlight, contradicts the idea that the moon reflects the sun's light. If the moon were reflecting sunlight, its light should be warm, not cool. This observation supports the idea that the moon generates its own light, which is fundamentally different from the sun's light. Finally, let's talk about eclipses. Eclipses are one of the most dramatic celestial events we can observe, and they offer significant evidence that challenges the globe model. According to the globe model, lunar eclipses occur when the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, casting a shadow on the moon. But there have been several documented cases where the moon is visible in the sky at the same time as the sun during a lunar eclipse. This phenomenon, known as the Selenelian eclipse, shouldn't be possible if the Earth were casting a shadow on the moon. If the sun and moon are both visible above the horizon, how can the Earth be between them? Globe defenders will say this is an optical illusion or refraction bending the light, but that explanation falls apart when we consider that both the sun and moon are clearly visible in the sky. The flat Earth model provides a better explanation for this, suggesting that eclipses are caused by other celestial bodies passing in front of the moon, rather than the Earth's shadow. Conclusion of Section 3. These 7 lines of observational data make it clear that what we see with our own eyes doesn't match the globe model's predictions. From the behavior of distant objects to the sun, moon, and stars, everything points to a flat Earth. In the next section, we'll take a look at repeatable experiments that anyone can conduct to further confirm the flat Earth reality. Section 4. Repeatable experiments supporting the flat Earth model. When it comes to proving the flat Earth, nothing is more powerful than repeatable experiments that anyone can perform. These simple, repeatable experiments consistently show results that align with the flat Earth model, not the globe. Let's go through 7 key experiments, and I'll add even more compelling examples where objects that should be hidden by hundreds of feet of curvature remain visible. One of the most straightforward experiments is the laser test over water. According to the globe model, laser beams shot across large bodies of water should disappear as they go beyond the curve. But researchers have shown that the laser stays visible far beyond where it should. An even more dramatic example of this is a test conducted over Lake Michigan, covering a distance of over 60 miles. Based on the curvature formula, more than 2,000 feet of the target should have been hidden by the Earth's curve, but the laser was still visible at that distance. This shows that not only is there no measurable curvature, but the Earth is flat over even greater distances than the globe model allows. Globe proponents typically respond by saying the laser beam is bending due to atmospheric conditions, but in many of these tests, the weather conditions are carefully controlled. Plus, these kinds of results happen consistently, not just as rare occurrences. Another compelling test involves using a gyroscope to measure the Earth's rotation. If the Earth were spinning, a gyroscope would detect that motion, but time and again, we find that gyroscopes remain perfectly still, showing no evidence of rotation. For example, researchers using highly sensitive fiber optic gyroscopes have conducted tests over 24-hour periods, expecting to see the Earth's rotation. According to the globe model, there should be a measurable drift, but in these experiments, the gyroscopes remained fixed, with no drift detected. This further supports the idea that the Earth is stationary. Again, globe supporters might claim that these gyroscopes are calibrated to ignore the Earth's rotation, but the lack of any measurable drift in highly sensitive instruments tells a different story. If the Earth were spinning at over 1,000 miles per hour, it would be impossible for gyroscopes to remain unaffected. Let's also look at another classic experiment, long-distance photography, which provides even more examples of distant objects being visible when they shouldn't be. When we photograph distant cities or mountains, the entire structure should disappear behind the curve if the Earth were a globe. But what do we see? The structures remain fully visible. For instance, across Lake Ontario, researchers have captured clear images of Toronto from 58 miles away. According to the curvature formula, 2,042 feet of the skyline should be hidden, yet the buildings are clearly visible. This is a significant discrepancy that the globe model can't explain. Some globe proponents argue that refraction bends light to make the buildings appear visible, but refraction alone cannot account for the consistent visibility of these structures across various conditions. The curvature should obscure them entirely, but it doesn't. The Bedford level experiment, which we've discussed before, also shows these kinds of results. The test was designed to measure curvature over a 6-mile stretch, where 24 feet of curvature should have been observed, but the water remained flat. This experiment has been repeated multiple times with similar results. To add to this, tests conducted over longer distances, like those on Lake Pontchartrain, show power lines remaining visible from much farther away than they should be. If the Earth were curved, large portions of these lines should be hidden behind hundreds of feet of curvature, but they remain visible when observed with high-zoom cameras. The plumb line test is another simple, repeatable experiment that can be done by anyone. According to the globe model, plumb lines in different locations should converge slightly toward the center of the Earth. But when researchers test this over long distances, they find that plumb lines remain perfectly parallel. One compelling example comes from a test conducted in South America, where plumb lines were measured in cities hundreds of miles apart. According to the globe model, there should have been a noticeable difference, with the lines converging by several degrees. But they remained perfectly parallel, further supporting a flat Earth. Globe proponents often claim that the curvature is too subtle to affect plumb lines over these distances, but the lack of any convergence, even over larger distances, challenges the idea that the Earth is a sphere. Then there's the crepuscular rays experiment. We see sunlight streaming through clouds at sharp angles, which suggests that the sun is much closer than the 93 million miles the globe model claims. If the sun were that far away, the rays should be nearly parallel by the time they reach Earth. But what we observe are rays that fan out, converging toward a point in the sky. A great example of this is the crepuscular rays seen during sunrise and sunset, where the angle of the rays would indicate that the sun is only a few thousand miles above the Earth, not millions. This observation alone suggests a much closer and smaller sun, which fits with the flat Earth model. The globe model argues that the spread of crepuscular rays is just a trick of perspective, but perspective doesn't account for the sharp angles we see. If the sun were millions of miles away, we wouldn't see rays diverging like that. Finally, we can revisit the Michelson-Gale experiment, which attempted to detect the rotation of the Earth by measuring the movement of light. This experiment was set up to detect small changes in light speed caused by the Earth's rotation. According to the globe model, there should have been measurable movement, but the experiment found none. Some globe supporters claim that the experiment was flawed or that it didn't account for the movement of the ether. But the fact that it failed to detect any rotation challenges the idea of a spinning Earth. These additional examples, where objects remain visible despite being hundreds of feet beyond the supposed curve, make it even clearer that the Earth is flat. Whether it's laser tests, gyroscopes, or long-distance photography, the results consistently contradict the globe model. In the next section, we'll continue to explore even more evidence that challenges the globe model and supports the reality of a flat, stationary Earth. As we've explored throughout this video, the evidence supporting a flat, stationary Earth is both compelling and consistent. From the observational data to repeatable experiments, every line of inquiry challenges the globe model at its core. But this idea of a flat Earth isn't new. It has deep roots in history. For thousands of years, many ancient cultures believed the Earth was flat. The early Hebrews described the Earth as being set on pillars with a firmament above, separating the waters from the heavens. The Babylonians, Egyptians, and many others held similar views. It was only in relatively recent history that the globe model became widely accepted. This flat Earth understanding has been part of human knowledge for centuries, and when we dismiss it, we are cutting ourselves off from a deeper historical and spiritual truth. There are also scientific anomalies that further support the flat Earth model. Gravity, for instance, is said to hold everything to the Earth, creating its spherical shape. Yet gravity itself is full of inconsistencies. It supposedly keeps the oceans attached to the globe, but allows birds to fly and clouds to float. If gravity were as powerful and uniform as they say, why do we see these inconsistencies? And when we talk about the Coriolis effect, it's often cited to explain the rotation of storms or the curving of projectiles. Yet, in practical applications, it doesn't have the consistent impact that we're led to believe. At the heart of this lies a deeper truth, one that is central to the seed war narrative we've been discussing in our other videos. The deception of the globe model is part of a larger agenda, a plan set in motion by rebellious spiritual forces that want humanity to be disconnected from God's true creation. If they can make us believe that we live on a spinning ball, hurtling through a vast, meaningless universe, they can sever our connection to the divine. This is part of the seed war, a battle for control of humanity's knowledge, faith, and destiny. When we embrace the flat Earth truth, we are reclaiming not only our understanding of creation, but also our place within God's plan. But this journey doesn't end here. We've only scratched the surface of this monumental topic. There is so much more to explore, so if you found this video valuable, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel and support our work. Your support allows us to continue sharing these vital truths and uncovering the deceptions that have been hidden from us for centuries. Click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. If you want to dive deeper into how the flat Earth model ties into the broader seed war, where fallen angels, rebellious spiritual forces, and hidden knowledge all play a role in deceiving humanity, stick with us. We're working on future content that will connect all the dots and reveal how this is just one piece of the greater cosmic battle between good and evil. Help us spread the word by sharing this video with others, because the more people wake up to the truth, the harder it will be for the powers that be to keep us in the dark. Together, we can expose these deceptions and prepare for what's to come. So, stay tuned for more on the seed war and the battle for humanity's soul. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.